Now, I know most of you are out of money by now or never had any to begin with, and if you do, please share. But I've been seeing a lot of talk about Ganyu in the community recently, mostly related to how good or how bad she is. Now, my who to pull for video is scheduled for later, but I did want to tell you guys a bit about Ganyu's power level since I've been playing her since day one of her release, and she's probably the character I've spent the most time with on Genshin. Now, I'm going to try to look at this as objectively as possible. However, there are going to be some categories and some things that are just subjective no matter what way you look at them. So with all that being said, the first thing I want to talk about is why Ganyu sees less play now than she used to. The main misconception that I want to clear up is that she fell off or got power crept, because I hear that a lot. Now, honestly, you don't see a ton of people arguing that Ganyu is a bad unit, because if you're seeing the damage numbers she puts out at high investment and you think that's low, then I mean, you're just wrong, right? But I'll sort of talk about why she is or isn't strong later in the video, so stay tuned for that. I want to keep to this topic. The main argument that she either fell off or isn't as good as she used to be is coming from both Spiral Abyss usage in conjunction with some content creators talking about how unnecessary she is. Now, if you look at spiralabyss.org, obviously this isn't going to be a completely accurate metric, but it does have a fairly large sample size, so just for the sake of this video, I do want to talk about the information it gives us, which is that for Spiral Abyss Floor 12, about half the people that have Ganyu use Ganyu. Now, honestly, I don't know how many people have Ganyu, and I don't know where to find that stat, but for her being the quote-unquote best DPS in the game, you'd think it'd be more than half the players, right? Or maybe to you, half seems like a lot, but for context, if you look at Bennett, you look at Raiden, Zhongli, Kazuha, Xingqiu, and many other characters, they see above 50% usage for players that have them. One of the big ones is Ayaka, actually, because Ayaka released in Inazuma, and there was this constant battle between people who thought Ayaka was better than Ganyu and people who thought Ganyu was better than Ayaka. So the question is, why are there other units on top if Ganyu is so good? Has Ganyu truly been power crept by other characters? Let's use the Ayaka Ganyu situation for example. Ganyu is a sustained cryo DPS. She does a ton of cryo damage because her charge shots have the multipliers of elemental bursts. It is really just absolutely insane, and I love her character so much for that reason, as well as her just being adorable and sleepy and tired all the time. I love it. Another reason she's able to access these high damage numbers is because she has access to melt, or reverse melt technically. Reverse melt allows her to multiply her damage output by a ton. Now, if we look at Ayaka, she's not actually as much of a sustained DPS as people like to think. Yeah, for sure, she actually does output a lot of damage. I'm not saying she doesn't output damage, but most of her damage that you're going to be putting out is from her skill and burst. Her burst does a ton of damage very, very quickly and can hit multiple targets. For high-end Spiral Abyss content, this actually works out very, very well right now because there's lots of boss enemies and not a lot of trash mobs in the higher floors, namely floor 12. So for this iteration of Spiral Abyss, Ayaka actually is a better pick than Ganyu, which could lead to her higher usage rate than Ganyu. It's also worth noting that you could classify Ayaka as a burst DPS over Ganyu, who is someone like a consistent, sustained DPS, because while Ayaka can do decent damage with her auto attacks and charged attacks, most of her damage is coming from her burst, whereas with Ganyu, a lot of the time, her damage is going to cover her charge shots and its AoE. Ultimately, these units aren't super comparable because they fill different roles, with Ayaka's role being to kill the enemies very, very fast and hopefully in 1 or 2 rotations, and Ganyu being able to just slowly whittle down enemies with big charged attacks. But then what about other characters? Because supposedly, again, Ganyu is one of the best DPS in the game, if not the top DPS. People often say Hu Tao isn't as good as her, people say that Xiangling is the best pyro DPS in the game, but she still isn't as good as Ganyu. People everywhere want to let you know that Ganyu is the best DPS, and whether or not that is the case completely relies on the Spiral Abyss rotation. But it is undeniable that she does a lot of damage. She has an extremely high base attack, and again, she has elemental burst scaling for her charged attacks. Not to mention her elemental burst itself is also very good and gets quadratic scaling when you group up enemies because each icicle can hit multiple enemies at once. Well, in relation to the Spiral Abyss usage of Ganyu, at the very least, we can conclude that a lot of it has to do with the enemies chosen. However, there is another part of the Spiral Abyss that greatly affects character usage, and that is going to be Spiral Abyss buffs. Currently, as of January 11, 2022, when a character deals elemental damage to opponents with a normal attack, charged attack, plunging attack, elemental skill, or elemental burst, all party members gain 10% bonus damage for that element and will gain 10% bonus damage every 3 seconds until obtain 100% bonus elemental damage through this Blessing of the Abyssal Moon. When a character deals a different type of elemental damage to an opponent this way, the previous elemental damage bonus gained will reset. Now, that was long and wordy, but essentially what that means is as long as you deal one type of damage and only one type of damage, you're going to gain elemental damage bonus, and if you interrupt it with any other kinds of damage, you are going to see that elemental damage buff disappear. Ultimately, that means that this Abyss is going to cater towards mono teams, which means that if you're going to play Ganyu, it's going to be in mono cryo, which is actually fairly popular right now because of Shenhe. But that team also features Ayaka, and some people also opt for Diona as well. Now, that could explain all of those characters' high usage rates this time time around, but Ayaka is still ahead, and so are many other DPS. Well, for Xiangling and Bennett and Raiden and Xingqiu all being ahead, we can basically assume that that's going to be Raiden National, or that many players are just using National Team. And why would that be happening? Because National is one of the most free-to-play friendly comps in the game, if not the most free-to-play friendly comp. But Xiangling also has some crossover into Melt Ganyu setups, so that could also be why she's seeing some play as well. But that still doesn't really explain why Ayaka is seeing more play than Ganyu. So has Ganyu just fallen off? Well folks, it is time to debate between waifu or meta. With many characters at the top like Raiden, Ayaka, Hu Tao, Eula, and Ganyu, who are all very popular characters, not even for their kits, but just for their appearance, their personality. All in all, these characters are waifu. But if you look at their kits, they're also meta. Now, Ayaka is the primordial waifu. She's been around since the beta of the game, and people were saving up from day one to C6 her when she came out as a free-to-play player. Ayaka is insanely popular, and same deal with Hu Tao because of her voice actress Ria Takahashi, and I'm mostly referencing the JP one because Hu Tao players are a bunch of weebs, and because of her in-game personality that makes her just seem like a fun unit to use. Both of these characters were highly sought after. Now, Ganyu was also highly sought after, but in general, Ayaka had way more hype around the character just because people already knew and had an attachment to that character for so long. And of course, her voice actresses are very good too. Now, that's not to say that Ganyu's voice actresses aren't good. That's not what we're talking about. What I mean is that Ayaka was one of the most highly anticipated characters when the game released, and Ganyu just simply was not. At least not on the same level as Ayaka. In addition to that, you also have the argument of new characters are just played more, which is true. You'll see that with a lot of newer characters that come out, as long as they aren't completely awful, which unfortunately hasn't been the case for a lot of Inazuma characters, people will play them just because they want to. Yoimiya fans are a perfect example because Yoimiya is a character that has been shown to not actually be that great in comparison to some other top DPS because she lacks AoE, but both her extremely fun personality and ease of play make her a very popular character in Abyss as well, especially for being as low rated on tier lists as people make her. Another big argument for Ganyu's lack of play could just be mobile players, because Genshin has a massive mobile player audience, and it's hard to play bows on mobile, I won't lie. If you can play bows on mobile, you deserve a pat on the head and $1 million. It's hard. You might not need to aim with Ganyu, you can shoot the ground, but you still do get more damage if you do hit him. But there is one last argument that people use to talk about why they don't play Ganyu or why they don't like Ganyu. And this opinion is quite the controversial one, because it's that Ganyu's just boring to play. Ganyu and Amber are the only two characters in the game that are designed for you to sit and chip away at characters' health by using aimed shots. And while Ganyu has absolutely busted scalings, when you have absurdly high scalings in conjunction with not a lot of active play, like you just shielding up and aiming your shots at the enemies and blasting them into oblivion, the gameplay loop can get rather repetitive, less flexible, and overall kind of mind-numbing. Now again, it is a controversial opinion, because there are plenty of people who play Ganyu who think the fun of Ganyu is obliterating everyone or is using aimed shots, because not a lot of characters have that playstyle. And this opinion is completely subjective. However, if you're a player that has Ayaka and Ganyu together, you might find that Ayaka is more fun to play, and that could be why people use her as well. But all of those arguments aside, you cannot deny that Ganyu is still a strong unit, and here's why. She is the best sustained DPS in the game. She does consistent damage over time. There's no cooldowns on her aimed shots. She just has to charge them up and shoot. And hypothetically, if you just wanted to aim shot every enemy in the game, you could do that, except for enemies with cryo shields. She has an elemental burst for multipliers. Her multipliers on her charged attack are insanely good. Her elemental burst is also insanely good. Melt Ganyu is very free to play friendly because it utilizes Bennett and Xiangling, and Ganyu's weapons are really free to play friendly. A prototype Crescent will actually do very well on her because all you have to do is hit one aimed shot to get up to a maximum of 72% attack bonus on it at Refinement 5. In addition to that, she actually has 3 artifact sets that work on her fairly well. She can use 4-piece Wanderer's Troop, she can use Blizzard Strayer, or she can even use Shimenawa, which is very resin efficient and works extremely well in a melt team when you don't even use her burst in the first place. Ganyu can also play the role of support very well and output a ton of cryo damage and reverse melts in a pyro team, and in general just bonk enemies with giant icicles. While she may not feel very flexible because of the damage scaling on her charged attacks, you can basically throw her with a bunch of different supports and she's going to still output a ton of damage and be a very solid unit in general. Now, as we discussed earlier, this Abyss in particular is just not very good for Ganyu, and people who are playing Ganyu in this Abyss need to be playing Mono Cryo, otherwise you're going to be missing out on a bunch of multipliers that are going to make Ganyu look worse in comparison to other characters like Ito, Ayaka, or Mono Pyro Hu Tao. And I will admit that Ganyu is not for everybody. She can be boring to play if you don't like sitting around and doing aim shots, and for comfort of play you may need to run a shield with Ganyu. That could occupy your Zhongli. But none of these reasons make the character a bad character. With all of the good things that Ganyu has going for her, as long as you're a player that doesn't mind using aimed shots, Ganyu is still one of the most consistently good units in the game, and as long as they don't try to purposefully remove her from the meta by giving us bad Spiral Abyss buffs for her, she's going to stay near the top. Overall, Ganyu is still a very solid unit, and the reason she's not played as much today, I mean, there's a lot of them, but it's not because she's a bad character. These are just some things to think about before you go and roll on the Ganyu banner or skip it. This has been Braxophone, and I look forward to giving you guys my updated Ganyu guide as soon as I can. Let me know what you guys think of Ganyu in the comments, and I will catch you guys later.